Drug dealing has always been a quiet business. The smart ones never showed their faces. They never posted their cash. They never branded themselves. They moved in the shadows, kept their mouths shut, and let the money do the talking, only behind closed doors. But the men in these cases never got that memo. They posted their cash on Snapchat. They wore their own logos on their tops. They walked into the most famous department store on earth to access vaults stuffed with hundreds of thousands in notes. They ran wholesale cocaine networks from inside prison cells and bragged about it to dealers across 4 different messaging apps. They laundered tens of millions while living openly on the Costa del Sol. And every single time, the bragging is what destroyed them. Today we are covering Glasgow drug gangs whose digital footprints, branded lifestyles, and inability to stay quiet ended every single one of their operations. What you are about to hear will show you exactly how modern crime gets caught. Section 1. Dr. Gringo, the Snapchat drug business built like a legitimate startup. In the spring of 2021, if you were a young person in Glasgow with the right connections, you could open Snapchat and order cannabis the same way you might order a takeaway. You needed a referral, you needed a phone number, and you needed to know which account to message. The account was called Dr. Gringo. There was a second one called Roger Dodger that handled harder substances. Both were run by the same man. His name was Kashif Sadiq. He was 32 years old, and he was based in Glasgow, with operations stretching out to East Kilbride in Lanarkshire. He told one customer he met in person to just call him the doctor. What made this operation different from the typical street-level dealing that police across Scotland deal with every week was that Sadiq did not run it like a street operation. He ran it like a business. A real business, with branding, with promotions, with a customer onboarding process, and with a multi-channel delivery model that would not have looked out of place at a small e-commerce startup. The branding came first. Sadiq actually had a top made with the Dr. Gringo logo printed on it. He wore it. He was so committed to the identity that he turned his own face into part of the brand. The Dr. Gringo account dealt mainly in cannabis, including products like cannabis cookies. The Roger Dodger account dealt in what was described in court as party substances, including cocaine, ecstasy, and ketamine. 2 separate brand identities for 2 separate product lines run by the same management. The kind of structure a legitimate company would call diversification. Then came the marketing. The gang ran online adverts. They ran promotions. They ran what the prosecution would later describe in court as special offers. The same language any high street retailer would use to push a sale. Customers were not just being sold drugs, they were being marketed to. They were being sold a brand. And the people behind it understood that brand loyalty was how you turned a one-off customer into a repeat one. The strange genius of the whole thing was that Sadiq had taken the principles of legitimate consumer marketing and bolted them onto a Class A and Class B drug network. The customer onboarding was where it got genuinely clever, and also where the operation revealed how cautious Sadiq actually was beneath all the showing off. You could not just message Dr. Gringo and become a customer. You needed what the gang called a referee. A referee was an existing customer who could vouch for who you were, someone who could confirm you were not police, not press, not a problem. Without a referee, you got nothing. The system was designed to filter strangers out and keep the customer base limited to a network of vouched, trusted users. It was, in effect, a private members club for drug buyers, accessed through a referral chain. Once you were in, the gang offered you 3 different ways to receive your order. There was a postal service, where the product would be sent to an address. There was a pickup service, where you would collect from a specific location. And there was a drop-off service, where the product would be brought to you. Each of these 3 methods had its own dedicated phone number. 3 numbers, 3 channels, 3 ways to fulfill an order, and every one of those Dr. Gringo numbers was traced directly back to Kashif Sadiq. It was not just buyers being recruited through Snapchat, the couriers were too. One Snapchat story, which was also pushed onto the Telegram messaging app, read like this: "Anyone home all day? Want to make the easiest £80 ever? Shout me." That was the recruitment pitch. £80 for a few hours of dropping packages around the city. Easy money for anyone short on rent, anyone bored at home during a slow week, anyone curious enough to reply. And every reply was a new piece of the network, New runners, new addresses, new fingerprints on the supply chain. Behind it all sat Sadiq. Not on a street corner, not in a back office, on a phone, directing a sales operation that ran on social media, reached customers through their pockets, and moved product through the postal system and his own dedicated couriers. He was not the kind of figure most people picture when they think of a drug boss. He was a 32-year-old man running a digital business, complete with logo merchandise, a referral network, 3 distribution channels, and a marketing calendar. For a while, the model worked. The phones kept ringing, the orders kept coming in, the cash kept stacking up. The branded top kept getting worn, the customer base kept growing, one referee at a time. Sadiq was running what the lead investigating officer would later describe as a sophisticated criminal enterprise, and he was running it almost in plain sight. But here is the thing about a business that brands itself. A business that brands itself can be found. A business that runs special offers can be advertised to. A business that uses a referral system can be infiltrated, because all you need is one referee who is not who they say they are. Sadiq had built a model that depended on people he could not actually see, vouching for people he had never met, on an app that left a digital footprint everywhere it went. In May of 2021, that footprint started getting attention. Officers from the Greater Glasgow Division's Proactive Criminal Investigations Department began looking into the 2 online supply lines. 4 officers were assigned to go undercover. They needed a way in. They needed a referee. And they were about to find one, in a place nobody in the gang would have suspected. What happened next did not just expose the Dr. Gringo operation, it led directly to one of the most unusual arrests in recent Scottish criminal history, in one of the most famous buildings on the planet, and to the discovery of nearly £1 million in cash hidden behind a single locked door in central London. Section 2. The Harrods Bust. How Sadiq was caught reaching for his cash. Harrods is one of the most photographed buildings in London. Tourists queue outside it just to take pictures of the green and gold facade. Inside, on a normal afternoon, you can find perfume counters, designer handbags, the food hall, and on the lower levels, something most visitors never think about: a vault. A private safety deposit facility where wealthy customers, business owners, foreign visitors, and apparently Glasgow drug bosses can store valuables behind a locked door with a key only they hold. In August of 2021, Kashif Sadiq walked into Harrods to access one of those boxes. He had been making the trip from Glasgow to London for some time. The box at Harrods was not the only one he had. He also had safety deposit boxes in Edinburgh and in the Pollokshields area of Glasgow. 3 boxes across 2 countries, all holding the kind of physical wealth you cannot easily explain on a tax return. Cash, gold, watches. The proceeds of a sales operation that ran on Snapchat and reached its customers through their phones eventually had to land somewhere physical, and Sadiq had chosen the most prestigious storage option in the United Kingdom for the largest portion of it. What he did not know was that the Greater Glasgow Division's Proactive Criminal Investigations Department had been watching him. The investigation had started 3 months earlier, in May 2021. 4 officers had been assigned to go undercover, and one of them had managed to get inside the Dr. Gringo customer network. The way in came through an unexpected route. A medical student vouched for the undercover officer as a referee. That was all the gang needed. The gates opened. The officer placed a series of test purchases. With every order, the officers learned more about how the operation worked, who handled which role, and where the money was flowing. By August, the investigation had reached the point where police could move. They moved on Sadiq directly, at the moment he was most exposed. He was arrested at Harrods while trying to access his safety deposit box in Knightsbridge. The man who had built an entire digital brand on Snapchat was now standing inside one of the most secure storage facilities in London, with police closing in around him. What was inside the Harrods box alone was enough to confirm everything the investigation had suspected. £282,350 in cash, £63,000 worth of gold bars, £140,200 worth of Rolex and other luxury watches. All of it stacked behind one locked door in one of the most famous buildings in the country. But the Harrods box was just the start. Police now knew Sadiq had 2 more boxes to check, one in Edinburgh, one in Pollokshields. When officers worked their way through all 3 locations, the total kept climbing. The total cash seized across the boxes came to £913,310. The total value of gold, jewellery and watches came to £269,045. Police Scotland would later confirm that the overall asset seizure exceeded £1 million, with more than 900,000 of that being physical cash. To put that in perspective, this was a 32-year-old man with no legitimate business of comparable size who had managed to convert a Snapchat operation into more than £1 million in tangible wealth, stored in 3 locked boxes across 2 countries. The detective inspector who led the case, Alan Ferguson, summed it up by describing it as a sophisticated criminal enterprise, with Sadiq exploiting his illicit activity to fund a lavish lifestyle that included trips to London and high-value transactions in luxury department stores. That phrasing matters. It tells you exactly how police saw the case. It was not just that Sadiq was selling drugs, it was that he was using the proceeds to live a life that the law was eventually going to ask him to account for. And the moment he was caught, the paper trail of receipts, deposits and box visits suddenly became the strongest evidence against him. There is something almost theatrical about being arrested at Harrods. It is not the kind of place a Glasgow gang member is supposed to end up in handcuffs. The store sits in one of the wealthiest postcodes in London, and the safety deposit vault inside it is associated with old money, oil money, foreign investors, and discreet wealth. Sadiq had managed to insert himself into that environment. He had built a Snapchat brand in Glasgow, generated enough cash to need a vault in Knightsbridge, and travelled down to access it like any other client. For a moment, he was treating the system the same way the legitimate wealthy do. Move the money, lock it away, come back when you need it. The arrest collapsed all of that in a single afternoon. From that point forward, every box would be opened, every receipt would be pulled, every Snapchat number would be cross-referenced, every bank account would be examined. The investigation had already documented the digital side of the operation through undercover purchases. Now it had the physical proof: cash, gold, watches, and a paper trail that started in Glasgow and ended in London. For the gang, this was the moment everything started to come apart. Sadiq was the principal. Sadiq was the brand. Sadiq held the phone numbers. With Sadiq in custody and the boxes seized, every other member of the operation was now exposed. The gang had run a customer referral system to keep strangers out, but they had no system to protect themselves from a boss who had become the single biggest piece of evidence in their own case. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the investigation found next was not just where the money was sitting, it was where the money had been going. The receipts, the deposits, and the spending patterns would reveal a lifestyle so visible, so traceable, and so flagrantly documented that the gang had essentially been writing the prosecution's case for them in real time. Section 3. The lifestyle that got them caught. £8,150. Louis Vuitton in a single day. The thing about cash is that it eventually wants to leave the box. Locking up nearly £1 million in a Harrods vault is impressive, but only if you actually plan to leave it there. Kashif Sadiq did not. He wanted to spend it. He wanted to wear it, eat it, drink it, and travel with it. He wanted other people to see him with it, and the moment he started spending, he started leaving footprints all over the legitimate retail and banking systems of 2 countries. Those footprints, more than anything else, were what cemented the case against him. Take a single day in June of 2021. One afternoon in one shop. Sadiq spent £8,150 on Louis Vuitton items inside Harrods. That is not a quiet purchase. That is not the kind of transaction a luxury retailer forgets. There is paperwork. There are CCTV cameras. There is a record of what was bought, when it was bought, and how it was paid for. Whatever he picked up that day, he left a documented trail behind him. And he was not finished. On that same day, he spent another £1,300 at clubs and hotels in London. So in the space of roughly 24 hours, a 32-year-old man from Glasgow had spent nearly £10,000 in the capital, in venues that all keep records, and on cards or accounts that all leave a digital footprint. Then there was Sadiq's right-hand man, Jordan Devine, the 29-year-old who ran the Roger Dodger side of the operation. Devine was just as visible. He spent £3,200 at the Selfridges department store in Manchester. He ran up a £522 bill at Nobu in London, the kind of restaurant where the diners come from the front pages of magazines. None of this is the spending of a man trying to stay under the radar. This is the spending of a man who wants to be seen and who clearly believes he is too clever to ever be looked at properly. Behind the lifestyle, there was a banking trail that was even harder to explain. Across a 7-month stretch in 2021, the gang's bank accounts received the kind of deposits that no honest small business owner could hope to defend in front of a judge. One account took in £174,702. Another took in £159,905. A third took in £136,100. 3 accounts, 7 months, around £470,000 passing through them. That is not the sales figure of a Snapchat account. That is the sales figure of a real, functioning, mid-sized business. Except no business existed. This is where the elegance of the gang's branding strategy became the noose around their necks. Sadiq had spent so much energy building Dr. Gringo as a slick consumer experience that he had treated himself like a slick consumer too. The bank accounts, the Harrods bags, the Selfridges receipts, the Nobu dinner, the club tabs, the hotel folios. Every single one of those moments was the kind of evidence the courts love. None of it required confession. None of it required a witness. None of it required a single text message. The receipts spoke for themselves, and they spoke loudly enough that no defense lawyer could realistically explain them away. In the courtroom, Sadiq's lawyer John Scullion KC tried to soften it. He described the drug setup as innovative, but said there was also what he called a degree of naivety about it. That was the most generous reading he could offer. Innovative because of the branding, the structure, the referral system, and the use of social media. Naive because of everything you have just read. The branded top, the flashy spending, the willingness to walk into one of the most surveilled retail environments on earth and drop £8,000 in a single visit. The decision to keep nearly £1 million in cash inside vaults rented under traceable names. Innovative on the front end, hopelessly exposed on the back end. What the prosecution had by the time the case reached the High Court in Glasgow was almost a complete portrait of the operation, painted by the gang itself. The undercover purchases proved how the supply chain worked. The phone numbers proved who controlled it. The bank deposits proved how much was moving. The luxury receipts proved where the money was going. The vaults proved how much had been kept. Each piece of evidence reinforced the others. There were no real gaps. There were no real questions. There was only the question of how long each member of the gang would now spend behind bars. You can see the strange logic of how Sadiq must have thought about it. He had built a brand. Brands need to be visible. He had made money. People with money were supposed to enjoy it. He had associates. Associates were supposed to share in the rewards. Inside his own head, every Louis Vuitton purchase, every Nobu dinner, every visit to Harrods was probably evidence of his own success. Outside his head, in the offices of Police Scotland's Proactive Criminal Investigations Department, the same purchases were evidence of something very different. They were evidence of a paper trail he could never erase. And the Dr. Gringo operation was a team effort. Sadiq might have been the face of it, but 6 other men had played their part, each one with a specific role, a specific contribution, and now a specific length of time waiting for them at the High Court in Glasgow. Their names, their jobs inside the gang, and the sentences each of them received tell the full story of how a Snapchat startup turned into a 31-year prison total. Section 4. The full Dr. Gringo gang. 7 men, 31 years behind bars. On the 9th of August 2023, 7 men walked into the High Court in Glasgow and pled guilty to being involved in serious organised crime in Glasgow and East Kilbride during 2021. 2 months later, on the 6th of October, they came back in front of Judge Lord Clark to find out exactly how long the next chapter of their lives was going to be. Between them, the 7 would receive sentences totaling 31 years. Each man had played a specific role inside the operation. Each one had been worth a different amount of prison time, and the breakdown of who got what tells you exactly how the gang had been structured. At the top of the chain was Kashif Sadiq, 32 years old, the principal of the entire operation, the face behind the Dr. Gringo brand, the voice behind the Roger Dodger account, the man who told one customer to just call him the doctor, the man whose 3 phone numbers ran the cannabis supply chain, the man whose vaults in London, Edinburgh and Pollokshields had given up over £1 million in assets. Sadiq was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months. Lord Clark addressed him directly, telling him he had headed the Dr. Gringo and Roger Dodger operations and had profited significantly from doing so. Below Sadiq sat Jordan Devine, 29 years old, Sadiq's right-hand man on the Roger Dodger side of the business, the side that handled cocaine, ecstasy and ketamine. Devine had been the one running up the Selfridges and Nobu bills. Devine was the second highest sentence in the group, 5 years. His lawyer Billy Lavelle told the court that Devine realised he had ruined his life by turning to crime. The judge moved on. Next came Peter Davies, 23 years old, who got 4 years and 6 months. Davies had a strange place inside the gang. His role had been to organise bank accounts to be used by the operation. He was the one making sure the money had somewhere to land when it came in. Without Davies, the deposits of £174,000, £159,000 and £136,000 would have had nowhere to go. What was striking about Davies was that, according to his solicitor advocate Ross Ewell, he had only actually met other members of the gang in person when they all turned up in court together in August. He had been a remote contributor to a remote operation. The bank accounts had connected him to the gang more than any face-to-face contact ever had. Then came 3 men, all sentenced to 4 years each. The first was John Robertson, 27 years old, who had been paid for his help inside the Dr. Gringo operation. Robertson's defence lawyer, Brian McConaughey, KC, told the court that his client had got involved for what was described as financial gain. There was also the unusual detail that Robertson had broken his neck after falling from a balcony in Barcelona earlier that year. None of that altered the sentence, 4 years. The second of the 3 was Adam Ahmed, 24 years old. Ahmed's role had been to store drugs and help arrange sales. He was a logistics man inside the operation. His lawyer, Thomas Ross, KC, told the court that Ahmed had brought no honour to his respectable family by both taking and dealing in drugs. Whatever the family circumstances, the role inside the gang was real, and the sentence was 4 years. The third was Asad Raja, 28 years old. Raja had been part of the Dr. Gringo setup. His lawyer, Tony Graham, KC, asked the court not to lock him up at all, citing a number of factors including the relatively shorter timescale of his involvement. The judge did not agree. 4 years. At the bottom of the sentencing list was the only member of the 7 to receive less than 4 years. Jamshid Yaqub, 38 years old, 3 years. Yaqub's role had been to drop off cannabis and collect cash. A courier and a bagman. The kind of role that puts a person inside the chain without putting them anywhere near the decision-making. His lawyer, Alan MacLeod, told the court that Yaqub had become involved after the pandemic affected his job as a taxi driver. The pandemic had hit a lot of people in 2020 and 2021. Most of them did not respond by joining a Snapchat drug operation. Yaqub had, and he was now serving 3 years for it. Add it all up, 6 years and 9 months for Sadiq, 5 years for Devine, 4 years and 6 months for Davis, 4 years for Robertson, 4 years for Ahmed, 4 years for Raja, 3 years for Yaqub. The total comes to 31 years and 3 months between 7 men, for an operation that had run for a matter of months and had been mapped out by undercover officers in less than half a year. When Lord Clark addressed the gang from the bench, he did not single any one of them out for a speech. He spoke to all of them at once. He told them that serious organised crime damages the very fabric of society. He told them that the supply of controlled drugs blights communities and harms the well-being of individuals. Then he turned to Sadiq specifically and confirmed what everyone in the courtroom already knew. Sadiq had headed the operations. Sadiq had profited significantly from doing so. The judge sat back, the sentences were read, and the 7 men were taken away. Before we move on, If you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Sadiq's case was the loudest example of what happens when a digital drug operation grows too visible to survive. But he was not the only Scottish dealer working through encrypted apps. In a prison cell in Edinburgh, another man was building something even more ambitious, even more lucrative, and even more brazen than anything Dr. Gringo had attempted. Section 5. Dale Cleaton, the prison cell drug empire. The strangest thing about Dale Cleaton is that he was already in prison when he started running one of the most profitable cocaine operations Edinburgh had seen in years. He was not free, he was not on bail, he was not under any soft form of monitoring. He was inside HMP Edinburgh, doing actual time for an actual conviction, and from inside that cell, he was directing a drug supply network that would eventually be described in court as operating on an almost industrial scale. To understand how this happened, you have to start with how Cleaton ended up in prison in the first place. His full name is Dale Allen Cleaton. He was 31 years old when his prison cell empire was finally untangled in court, which means he was in his late 20s when he was first locked up. The original sentence was 45 months. The reason was that he had been caught with around 2 kilos of cocaine in Edinburgh, with a value of roughly £220,000. He admitted to being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs at the High Court in Edinburgh. He went inside. Before any of that, Cleaton had already shown the kind of temperament that was going to make prison difficult. On the 19th of June 2020, he had been involved in a road rage incident on a country road on the outskirts of Pennycook in Midlothian. He had got into a confrontation with another motorist. The two of them shouted at each other, then Cleaton produced a large knife and began waving it around. Witnesses were horrified enough to call the police. Cleaton was arrested and charged that same day. When the case eventually came to Edinburgh Sheriff Court, he admitted to threats of violence and breach of the peace. He was given a 160-day custodial sentence to run alongside the cocaine sentence he was already serving. There was even an earlier incident, all the way back in 2018, that gives you a sense of who Cleaton was as a younger man. He had been with a group of 3 other lads outside a train station in Manchester when they spotted the then England rugby coach Eddie Jones. Cleaton and his friends shouted abuse at Jones, taunting him about Scotland's win over England in the Calcutta Cup earlier that year. He was hauled into Manchester Magistrates' Court and fined £54. A small story at the time, a nuisance. The kind of thing that gets reported as a curiosity and forgotten. That was Cleaton's recorded background by the time he ended up in HMP Edinburgh. A road rage knife incident, a rugby abuse incident, and a major cocaine conviction. A man who clearly struggled to keep himself out of trouble, even when he was meant to be lying low. So when prison officers eventually realised that something was happening inside his cell, the surprise was not that Cleaton was breaking the rules. The surprise was the scale of what he was doing. The first discovery came on the 22nd of October 2021. Officers found a mobile phone and a SIM card in his cell. Phones inside prisons are not unusual. Most large prisons in the UK seize phones from cells regularly. What made this one different was the contents. The messages on the device showed Cleaton was not just chatting to friends or family. He was directing the supply of cocaine in the Edinburgh and Lothian areas. He had been doing it for some time. The second discovery came on the 25th of April 2022. Another phone, another SIM card, another stack of messages. By the time both phones had been examined, prosecutors had a picture of an operation that had been running steadily inside the prison and out across the central belt of Scotland. The Crown Office would later use specific language to describe Cleaton's role. They called him the driving force behind the group's wholesale-level activities. The phrase wholesale level matters. It tells you he was not selling tiny amounts to individuals. He was supplying lower-level dealers in bulk. He was sitting one rung above the street. His main partner in the operation was a man called Calvin Boyd Begbie. Begbie was 30 years old, ran a landscape gardening business in his legitimate life, and acted as Cleaton's right-hand man inside the network. The phone messages showed the two of them swapping what they called tick lists. A tick list, in this context, was a record of who owed money for cocaine they had already taken on credit. Begbie also sent photographs of the cocaine to Cleaton, so that Cleaton could check the quality. a man in a prison cell, looking at images of Class A drugs being prepared on the outside, signing off on whether the product was good enough to move. That is the kind of detail that sticks in a courtroom. Below Begbie sat his uncle, Fraser Boyd, who was 51. Boyd's role was to allow his Edinburgh home to be used as a storage facility for cocaine and the equipment associated with it. In February 2022, the messages captured Begbie discussing what Boyd would be paid for the storage. The agreed rate was £150 per kilo, a simple, almost business-like arrangement, with a price per unit that Boyd could expect every time the drugs passed through his house. Below them sat Mitchell White, 24 years old, a self-employed gardener who was the lowest in the structure. White sold quarter and half bars of cocaine in Haddington and Dunbar in East Lothian. In one message exchange with Cleaton, White complained that he was owed around £20,000 from his customers. Even at the bottom of the chain, the numbers were huge. But the real shock of the case was not the structure, it was the financial scale. The amount of money this prison cell empire was turning over every single month was about to land in court, and once it did, it changed how investigators thought about the whole operation. Section 6. The £216,000 a month wholesale cocaine operation. When prosecutors finished going through the contents of the two phones found in Dale Cleaton's prison cell, they were able to put a number on what the operation had been turning over. The Crown Office, working from the gang's own messages and their own estimates of how much each kilo of cocaine was worth, calculated a monthly turnover of around £186,000. STV News, reporting on the case later, put the figure even higher at one stage, at around £216,000 a month. Whichever number you take, the conclusion is the same. This was not a small-time prison cell hustle. This was a fully functioning wholesale cocaine business that was clearing the kind of monthly turnover most legitimate small companies in Scotland would never come close to. The way the gang reached those numbers came down to a very simple piece of arithmetic. According to the gang's own estimates, each kilo of cocaine was worth around £31,000 when it was moved on. Multiply that out across the volumes the messages described, and the monthly figures fell into place. The stated mission of the operation was straightforward: flood Edinburgh and the Lothians with cocaine. That phrase from the prosecution captured exactly what was happening. The drug was not just being supplied, it was being pushed in volumes large enough to dominate the market. The man making sure the product was good enough to be moved was Calvin Boyd Begbie. Begbie was the quality controller of the operation. His job was to assess the condition or quality of the cocaine before it was passed down to lower-level dealers. He would look at the product, judge it, photograph it, send the images to Cleaton, and confirm whether it was up to standard. In legitimate business, this is the role of a procurement manager. Someone has to check the goods before they hit the shelves. In Cleaton's gang, Begbie filled that role for Class A drugs. Begbie's other identity was unusual. By day, he ran a landscape gardening business. He was, on paper, a self-employed tradesman with a perfectly ordinary line of work, the kind of man you might call to do your front lawn. By night, he was the second in command of a wholesale cocaine network. Two lives running in parallel, one visible, one hidden. The hidden life eventually swallowed the visible one when the case came to court. Below Begbie sat his uncle Fraser Boyd, who was 51 years old. Boyd's contribution to the operation was simpler. He let the gang use his Edinburgh home as a storage location. Cocaine and the equipment used to handle it were kept inside Boyd's house. The arrangement was paid for at a fixed rate. In a message from February 2022, Begbie can be seen discussing what his uncle was being paid. The figure was £150 per kilo of cocaine being held. A simple, almost transactional family arrangement. Uncle stores the drugs. Nephew pays the uncle a per kilo fee. The kind of casual financial agreement that probably felt manageable until the morning the police arrived. The lowest member of the chain was Mitchell White, 24 years old, self-employed gardener. The same broad line of work as Begbie, the same kind of life on paper. White's role inside the gang was to push cocaine in two specific areas of East Lothian, Haddington and Dunbar. He sold what the messages called quarter bars and half bars. These are smaller fractions of a full kilo, The units street-level dealers and lower middle-tier sellers tend to handle. White was the man taking the wholesale product from above and breaking it down for the next level of distribution. Even White's complaints, captured in the messages, give you a sense of the scale. In one exchange with Cleaton, he was complaining that he was owed around £20,000 by his own customers. £20,000 in unpaid debts at the bottom of the chain. That figure alone tells you how much volume was moving through White's hands. A street-level operation does not generate £20,000 debts from individual buyers. A wholesale operation feeding a network of mid-level dealers does. Step back from the individuals and the structure becomes clear. Cleaton sat at the top, in a prison cell, directing everything by phone. Begbie sat just below him, free on the outside, handling quality control and acting as the link between the boss in custody and the operation on the streets. Boyd sat in his Edinburgh home, providing the warehouse. White sat in East Lothian, handling distribution. 4 men, 4 roles, one steady stream of cocaine flowing into the capital and the surrounding areas every single month. The mention of tick lists in the case is worth pausing on, because it tells you how far Cleaton's operation had grown. A tick list is the kind of record only a high-volume seller bothers to keep. It is essentially a rolling debt ledger. Customer A owes this much, Customer B owes that much, Customer C paid last week, has cleared it and is back for more. The fact that Cleaton and Begbie were trading these lists by message, openly, repeatedly, and in detail, tells you they had stopped thinking of themselves as criminals trying to stay quiet, and had started thinking of themselves as business operators tracking accounts receivable. The mindset is the giveaway. The mindset is also what got them caught. By the time the messages had been read, the tick lists had been mapped, the photographs of cocaine had been catalogued, and the storage arrangement at Boyd's house had been pieced together. The prosecution had a complete picture of an organised crime group running on an industrial level from inside the Scottish prison estate. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What was about to happen next, in the High Court in Glasgow, would put numbers on each man's role in years rather than pounds. And for Cleaton specifically, the sentencing was only going to be the beginning of his legal problems. Section 7. Cleaton's sentencing and the 2026 extra 3 years. On the 3rd of May 2024, at a preliminary hearing at the High Court in Glasgow, all 4 men involved in the prison cell cocaine operation pled guilty. Dale Allen Cleaton, Calvin Boyd Begbie, Fraser Boyd, and Mitchell White each accepted the charge of being involved in serious organised crime. By admitting it early, before a full trial had to be held, they had bought themselves what is known in Scottish law as a sentencing discount. A judge can cut the length of a sentence in exchange for an early guilty plea, on the basis that it saves the court system the time, cost, and witness burden of running a contested case. A little over a month later, on the 7th of June 2024, the 4 men returned to the High Court in Glasgow for sentencing. The judge was Lord Arthurson. He delivered a clear, unambiguous summary of what the operation had been. He described it as a prolonged and extensive, commercial Class A, controlled drug trafficking operation, with operations being directed from Cleaton's prison cell, overseen by Begbie, over a wide area on an almost industrial scale, serving the purposes of serious organised crime. That sentence is worth reading twice. A judge of the High Court of Justiciary, the senior criminal court of Scotland, sat in Glasgow and described a prison cell as the command centre of an industrial-scale Class A drug operation. That was the official judicial finding. Cleaton was sentenced to 7 years. The starting point had been 10 years, which is the statutory maximum available to the court under Section 28 of the Criminal Justice and Licensing Scotland Act 2010, the law dealing with serious organised crime offences. Cleaton received the discount for his early plea, taking him down from 10 years to 7. Begbie was sentenced to 6 years. Boyd, who had stored the drugs in his home, was sentenced to 3 years. White, who had been at the bottom of the chain, was sentenced to 32 months, discounted from a starting point of 4 years. Add the 4 sentences together, and the total comes to more than 18 years for the gang. But the sentences themselves were not the only consequences. Lord Arthurson also imposed serious crime prevention orders on Cleaton and Begbie. These orders run for 3 years and only kick in once each man is released from prison. The point of an SCPO is to put legal restrictions on a convicted person's life after they walk out of the gates, so that they cannot easily slide back into the same activities. The fact that the court took the additional step of imposing SCPOs on the two main figures tells you how seriously the bench viewed the risk of either of them returning to the same line of work. The Crown Office added that a proceeds of crime confiscation order against Cleaton and Begbie would be considered at a later date. Proceeds of crime work in Scotland is the part of the system designed to claw back the money, property, and assets that organised criminals have built up. It runs separately from the criminal sentence. A man can serve his time and still find that the court is coming after the cars, the houses, and the cash he accumulated while he was offending. For Cleaton and Begbie, the criminal sentencing was only the first wave. That should have been the end of Cleaton's story. 7 years inside, an SCPO waiting on the other side. A financial reckoning still to come. Most defendants would have spent the rest of their sentence keeping their heads down. Cleaton did not. Or rather, by the time he was sentenced in June 2024, the police had already gathered evidence of yet another criminal episode that he had been involved in. The new evidence came from a date almost a year earlier, on the 24th of August 2023. On that day, Cleaton had been stopped in a car on the M8 motorway near Livingston in West Lothian. Officers searched the vehicle. They found 2 iPhones. The phones were seized and sent off to be examined. What came back was a near-carbon copy of the original case that had put him behind bars in the first place. Messages, contacts, supply discussions, accounting details. Almost the entire pattern of the previous operation, reproduced inside the contents of 2 devices. The prosecutor in the new case was David Adams. He told the court that Cleaton had been using different pseudonyms across different encrypted messaging platforms. The platforms named in court were WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Telegram, and Snapchat. 4 separate apps, multiple identities, all communicating about the supply and distribution of cocaine at a mid to high level, as well as the collection and accounting of payments for the drug. One single message was particularly damaging. It revealed that Cleaton had £51,000 due to be paid to another supplier. He had also been in contact with an associate about sourcing cocaine from London, with a specific note that the supply could not be paid for using Scottish banknotes. Electronic tick lists were also recovered from the phones. The potential value of the cocaine described in those lists was up to £256,750. Adams summarised the scale clearly. The activities Cleaton had been involved in, he said, were extensive, apparently lucrative, and the equivalent of those of a wholesaler. On the 20th of March 2026, Cleaton, by then 33 years old, returned to the High Court in Glasgow. He pled guilty to being involved with others in serious organised crime between July and August 2023. Lord Arthurson, the same judge who had sentenced him in 2024, was on the bench again. His defence this time was led by Donald Findlay K.C., who said that Cleaton was not a foolish man, that he understood what he had done, and that he sometimes struggled to see the woods from the trees, but was not unaware of what lay ahead if he did not sort himself out. Lord Arthurson imposed an additional 3-year sentence, cut down from a starting point of 4 years, to begin at the end of the 7 years already imposed. With the SCPO still hanging over him, the proceeds of crime case still pending, and another 3 years stacked on the back of his existing sentence, Cleaton's life behind bars had effectively been extended into the next decade. While Scotland was watching one of its highest-profile dealers face this slow drumbeat of additional consequences, an even bigger storm had been gathering. 2 crime families that had been at war with each other for over 20 years were about to make headlines on 3 continents in the space of a single weekend. Section 8. The Lyons crime family. Origins and the 25-year feud with the Daniels. To understand why the events of March 2026 mattered so much, you first have to understand who the Lyons crime family actually are, where they came from, and why their name has been written into Scottish criminal history for a quarter of a century. The Lyons did not appear out of nowhere. They are not a figure of recent imagination. They are a Glasgow-grown organisation with deep roots in 2 specific corners of the city, a long list of activities, and a track record of violence that Spanish authorities would later describe as making them one of the most violent Scottish criminal organisations of recent decades. The family's origins trace back to two areas in the north of Glasgow, Milton and Postle Park. The Lyons family had lived in those streets for generations before any of them became known to police as organised criminals. The crime family itself is generally said to have emerged in the 1990s, founded by Eddie Lyons Sr., and has been active in some form ever since. Their stated activities, as documented in court cases, news reports and law enforcement statements over the years, include drug trafficking, money laundering, extortion, arms trafficking, and violence. The reputation followed the activities. Glasgow journalists and police officers have been writing about the Lyons for years before any wider audience ever heard the name. The reason the wider audience eventually did hear the name comes down to one event. In 2001, a consignment of cocaine belonging to the Daniel crime family, another Glasgow-based organisation, was stolen from a house in the Milton area. The cocaine was taken and sold by the Lyons. That single act, a theft and resale of someone else's drugs, lit a fuse that has not been put out for nearly 25 years. From that moment on, the Lyons and the Daniels were at war with each other. The two surnames became shorthand for the longest-running gang feud in modern Scottish history. The first major escalation came in December 2006. Stephen Lyons, who would later become the head of the family, was at an MOT garage in Lamhill. The garage was owned by his uncle. Gunfire was opened on the location in what would later be described as a targeted attack. Stephen Lyons survived. His younger cousin, Michael Lyons, who was only 21 years old, was killed. That moment locked in the bitter, generational nature of the feud. It was no longer a dispute about a stolen package of cocaine. It was now a feud with a dead body attached to it. And from then on, both sides were working from a place of grief, anger, and the obligation to settle the score. The score was apparently settled in January 2010. A man named Kevin Carroll, known by the nickname Gerbil, was an enforcer for the Daniel side of the war. Carroll was sitting inside an Audi A3 in the car park of an Asda supermarket in Robroyston, Glasgow. A masked gunman walked up to the vehicle and shot him dead. The killing was fast, professional, and very public. It happened in broad daylight in a supermarket car park used by ordinary shoppers. Two men were eventually charged with the killing. One of them, William Patterson, a Lyons member, received a 22-year sentence for his role. The other, Ross Monaghan, was acquitted in May 2012 when the trial judge ruled there was not enough evidence to convict him. The Carroll killing did not end the feud, it deepened it. From then on, the Daniel side of the dispute was carrying not just the original stolen cocaine grudge from 2001, but the loss of Carroll on top of it. Years of violence, threats, and retaliation followed. In 2017, Ross Monaghan, who had walked free from the Carroll case 5 years earlier, became a target himself. He was shot in the shoulder by a gunman who was pushing a pram at the gates of St George's Primary School in Penlee, Glasgow. Monaghan had been dropping his daughter off at school when it happened. He survived. After the attack, he made the decision that many gangland figures eventually do when Glasgow becomes too dangerous for them. He left. He moved to Spain's Costa del Sol, joining the long line of British and Irish criminal figures who have used southern Spain as a base of operations and a place to lie low. From there, he carried on doing business and stayed connected to the Lyons. The Lyons themselves had also internationalised by this point. Stephen Lyons had eventually settled in Dubai, and from the United Arab Emirates, he was running, according to Europol, the wider international operation that the Lyons clan had become. The family had connections with the Kinahan Organised Crime Group, a Dublin-based cartel that is considered one of the most powerful criminal networks in Europe. The Lyons were no longer simply a North Glasgow crime family. They were a transnational operation with footprints in Spain, the UAE, Turkey, and beyond, while still maintaining their identity as a Glasgow family at the centre of a Glasgow feud. The feud kept going through the 2000s and into the 2020s. Glasgow police investigated dozens of incidents over the years that they believed were connected to the bloody back and forth between the two families. The pattern would shift, the methods would change, but the core dispute, the one that started in 2001, with stolen cocaine in Milton, never went away. Every time it appeared to quiet down, another event would reignite it. By the time the international law enforcement community began moving against the Lions in late 2025 and early 2026, they were not just dismantling a drug trafficking and money laundering network, they were dismantling an organisation that had been at the centre of a quarter-century of Glasgow violence. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. By March 2026, the patience of multiple international agencies had run out, and what was being prepared in Eurojust offices, Spanish police stations, and Police Scotland headquarters was about to become the largest coordinated takedown the Lions had ever faced. Section 9. Operation Armorum. The March 27, 2026 raids that took down the Lions network. The morning of the 27th of March 2026 began like any other Friday in the central belt of Scotland. People were waking up in Bells Hill, Glasgow, Gartcosh, Whitburn, Caldercrooks, Cumbernauld and Coatbridge with no idea that some of their neighbours, some of the men in some of those addresses, were about to be at the centre of one of the largest coordinated police operations Scotland had ever taken part in. By the end of the day, 13 people would be in custody across 2 countries. By the end of the following week, that number would rise to 14, and the leader of one of the most notorious crime families in Europe would be sitting in a prison cell in the Netherlands, waiting for extradition. The Spanish authorities gave the operation a code name, Operation Armorum. The investigation behind it had not started that week, or that month, or even that year. The Civil Guard's Central Operational Unit, known as the UCO, had been working on the case for 3 years. In May 2024, the Spanish investigation had connected up with Police Scotland's investigation through Eurojust, the European Union Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, with operational support from Europol. From that point on, 2 countries were combing through the same datasets, comparing the same intelligence, and building toward the same action day. The plan was that, when the moment came, both sides would move at exactly the same time, in 2 countries against the same network. That moment came on the 27th of March 2026. In Scotland, 8 men were arrested in coordinated dawn raids. The arrests were carried out at addresses across Glasgow, North Lanarkshire and West Lothian. The towns named in police statements were Bells Hill, Glasgow, Gartcosh, Whitburn, Caldercrooks, Cumbernauld and Coatbridge. The men taken into custody ranged in age from 35 to 64. Specifically, they were aged 64, 46, 2 aged 45, 1 aged 41, 2 aged 39 and 1 aged 35. One of the men detained in North Lanarkshire was reported to have close personal connections to Eddie Lyons Jr. and Ross Monaghan, both of whom had been killed in Spain the previous year. In Spain, the Civil Guard moved against the rest of the network. 5 further arrests were made in the cities of Barcelona and Malaga, both well known as bases for British and Irish criminal figures who had relocated to the Mediterranean. Together, the 8 arrests in Scotland and the 5 in Spain made up the 13 on the action day itself. Spanish authorities described the operation as having dismantled the Lyons clan and named the family directly as one of the most violent Scottish criminal organisations to have emerged in recent decades. The operation did not stop at the borders of Scotland and Spain. Authorities in the Netherlands, in Turkey, and in the United Arab Emirates were also involved in the wider effort. In Turkey, the assets seized were significant. 2 plots of land were taken, a villa was seized, shares in a company were also frozen. The combined value of the Turkish real estate alone was estimated at around €600,000, which works out to roughly £520,000. Statements were taken from 4 Turkish citizens who were treated as witnesses to the wider investigation. The seizure of these foreign assets was the clearest possible signal that the case was not just about drugs being moved into Scotland. It was about the financial empire that had been built on top of those drug profits. Eurojust gave a clear summary of what investigators believed the network had been doing. The group, they said, was suspected of running a prolific criminal network involved in the transport of large quantities of drugs, including hundreds of kilograms of cocaine, into Scotland. They added that an international money laundering network had been built up on the proceeds, involving several million euros, with the dirty money being fed back into the wider criminal enterprise. Spanish authorities went further, alleging that the leader of the network and his partner had together laundered around 30 million euros while based on the Costa del Sol. Europol provided the picture of how the gang operated on the ground. The group, the agency said, was known for using violence to dominate territory and protect its criminal activity. Investigators believed it had maintained control over parts of the United Kingdom through intimidation, retaliation, and organised violence linked to drug trafficking. While that violence was playing out on the streets of Scotland, the senior figures of the network were operating from Spain and the United Arab Emirates, directing operations from a distance and managing the profits from the safety of foreign cities. The list of agencies involved in the operation gives you a sense of how big it had become. On the United Kingdom side, the lead agencies were the Police Service of Scotland and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, with the National Crime Agency providing additional support. On the Spanish side, the Court of Instruction No. 7 of Malaga, the Special Anti-Drug Prosecutor's Office in Malaga, and the Guardia Civil were leading. Around them, Europol coordinated operationally, deploying officers to both Scotland and Spain on the action day to make sure the dawn raids ran in parallel without anyone slipping through the cracks. Eurojust hosted the judicial coordination from its headquarters. The Netherlands, Turkey, and the UAE all played their part as the operation extended outward. In the days that followed the action day, 9 people appeared in Scottish courts facing various charges, including involvement in serious organised crime, supplying drugs, money laundering, and assault to injury. The Spanish arrests led to onward proceedings under Spanish jurisdiction. By every measure, the operation had hit the Lyons clan harder than anything before it. The whole structure had been touched. The streets in Scotland, the villas in Spain, the land in Turkey, the money in the bank accounts, the men in the addresses. But the most dramatic part of the operation was not the dawn raids in the Central Belt or the arrests in Barcelona and Malaga. It was happening on the other side of the world, in an airport on a tropical island, where the leader of the entire family was about to be lifted out of his life and put on a plane home. Section 10. Stephen and Amanda Lyons, Bali, Dubai, and the extradition chain. The day after the dawn raids in Scotland and Spain, Saturday the 28th of March 2026, a flight from Singapore touched down at I Gusti Ngurah Rai International Airport in Bali, Indonesia. Among the passengers stepping off the plane was a 45-year-old Scottish man. His name was Stephen Lyons. He was the head of the Lyons crime family, and he had walked, completely unaware, into the trap that had been set for him by the same investigation that had hit his network in Scotland and Spain 24 hours earlier. According to Indonesian investigators, Lyons was not in Bali for a holiday. They believed he was travelling to the region to set up a new drug supply network, looking to extend the family's operation further into Asia. He had reportedly arrived alongside 2 associates. One was Stephen Larwood, a known Lyons affiliate who had previously been based in Spain. The other was a man known only as Lewis Wang. The 2 associates managed to slip past airport authorities. Stephen Lyons did not. The reason he did not was simple. The moment his passport was scanned at immigration, his name flagged on the system. He was the subject of an Interpol red notice. That notice had been triggered by Spain's Guardia Civil, working through Interpol on behalf of the Spanish judicial authorities. The Indonesian immigration officers acted immediately. Lyons was pulled aside at the airport and taken into custody. By the time the rest of the world heard about it, he was already inside a detention centre at the airport's police station, with his passport in evidence and his lawyers being contacted. The head of the Ngurah Rai Immigration Office, Budi Kurniawan, made a public statement that quickly went around the world. He said Bali would never be a safe haven for international fugitives, that the country's systems were well integrated, and that its officers were highly experienced in detecting and apprehending Interpol fugitives. Felucia Senki Ratna, head of the Bali Regional Office of the Directorate General of Immigration, added that Bali had to remain a safe and orderly region, with no space for lawbreakers, including international fugitives. Indonesian officials describe Lyons in their statements as suspected of being the head of an international crime operation involving fictitious companies and money laundering. While Stephen Lyons sat in detention in Bali, another arrest took place on the same day. His partner, Amanda Lyons, was detained at Dubai International Airport in the United Arab Emirates by Dubai police. Spanish authorities considered her an active member of the criminal organization, and she was wanted by Spanish authorities for offences linked to the same money laundering investigation that had snared her partner. Police Scotland publicly confirmed it was aware of the arrest of a Scottish woman in Dubai and was working with European partners. The Spanish Civil Guard would later allege that Stephen and Amanda Lyons together had laundered around €30 million while living on the Costa del Sol. The fact that Amanda Lyons was arrested in Dubai on the same day that her partner was arrested in Bali was not a coincidence. It was a deliberate sequencing of the operation. Investigators had clearly mapped both of their movements and timed the simultaneous detentions to make sure neither could warn the other or move money once the news broke. What followed for Stephen Lyons was a journey that took him across 3 continents in just over a week. On the 31st of March 2026, he was flown from Denpasar in Bali to Jakarta, the Indonesian capital. From there, on the 8th of April 2026, he was placed on a flight bound for Amsterdam Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands, where he landed at 11:30 in the morning local time. The moment he touched down on Dutch soil, he was detained on a European arrest warrant that had been issued by a judge in Malaga, Spain. That warrant kicked off the formal extradition process to Spain itself. Budi Kurniawan, speaking again at the Indonesian end of the chain, said the deportation was a concrete step in Indonesia's commitment to safeguarding national sovereignty, and that the country would not allow its territory, especially Bali, to become a haven or base of operations for international criminals. Once in the Netherlands, Lyons faced an extradition hearing aimed at sending him onward to Spain. The Spanish authorities wanted to put him on trial for charges related to drug trafficking and money laundering. Spanish news outlets reported that once he eventually arrived on Spanish soil, he could legally be held on remand for up to 4 years while the case was prepared, with the initial 2 years potentially being extended by a further 2 years if a judge approved it. He was likely to be held at Alhaurin de la Torre prison near Malaga, the same facility holding Michael Riley, the man accused of the killings of Stephen Lyons' brother, Eddie Lyons Jr., and the longtime Lyons associate Ross Monaghan in Fuengirola in May 2025. The arrest of Stephen Lyons was not the first time he had been picked up in recent months. On the 17th of September 2025, around 6 months before Bali, he had been arrested in Dubai alongside 3 other prominent Scots linked to the Lyons family. The other 3 were Ross McGill, Stephen Jameson, and Stephen Larwood. The 4 were released on the 28th of September 2025 and ordered to leave the United Arab Emirates. Of the 4, only Stephen Jameson had so far been formally returned to Scotland. Jameson, then 42, was extradited from Dubai in December 2025 and later appeared at Glasgow Sheriff Court, charged with being involved in serious organised crime and being concerned in the supply of controlled drugs. For Stephen Lyons, the Bali airport arrest closed off the easy escape routes that had served him for years. Dubai had let him go in 2025. Indonesia did not. Spain was waiting at the end of the chain, with a courtroom, a judge, and a €30 million accusation prepared for him. The man who had spent decades running a Glasgow crime family from a distance was, for the first time in his career, on his way to face the consequences in person. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.